So welcome to DigitalDug. This video is about creating a fan art painting without using reference. And I'm going to use reference the whole way along. So that's confusing, I know, but bear with me and I'll explain it by the end. So for me to create my own version of a character, I really need to understand that character. That's key. If I'm working on designing my own character from scratch, then I don't need to worry about that. I'm the boss, nobody's art directing me, I'm in charge, I can do what I want. But when you're creating from an existing character, you're forced to follow a very rigid set of visual rules because it's already been designed. So I follow a 3-step process that helps me to do that with a lot of confidence. So the first step is a series of basically quick sketches, let's call it that. These are just to test my knowledge of the character from my memory in that moment. The second step is working from reference. So this is the study phase. The third step is really about combining those two, but mostly as much to 100% imagination as you can. So let's unpack those a little bit more and get into it. Step 1, the quick sketch stage. Now, none of these sketches needs to be fancy or even really particularly readable to anyone other than me. I need to know what I intended each stroke to mean, but I don't want to invest a lot of time in them. The point of this step is to test my knowledge of the character. How accurate am I in the details of the outfit, that sort of thing. I'm also trying to find out how well I understand the less tangible aspects of the character. You can judge a lot by the emotional value of a character by how they stand, how they gesture, how they move in total. And the actor created a great wealth of information there that you instantly recognize the Mandalorian by the way he moves. So I'm trying to see how many of the different poses that I can put him into. In the case of the Mandalorian, he's got all this armor and all the little busyness. Like this pose here where he's holding the gun and he's extending his left hand at the same time, which is usually a little counterintuitive, but he always does that because he's cocking those little rockets that he's got in his wrist. So things like that are important for me to notice and study and then create in these drawings. The other fringe benefit I'm looking for with this is getting the different perspectives. Like the armor in this moment right here is in a very awkward position. So do I understand how the armor will look at that profile? I did a further study of the helmet all by itself and the chest design on his armor as well, because those are pretty pivotal. Most of these, or all of these really, are done from imagination, but some are pulled more from memory, like this image of the Mandalorian carrying Grogu. This really stuck out in my head. I've watched this series a couple of times over, and this image in particular really resonated with me, so I decided to make it the focus a little deeper into step 2. One of the things that I love about this is just the outline of him, the silhouette that he creates, the position of his legs, how gently he's holding Grogu, but how he keeps that right hand sort of hanging just next to the gun like he could draw at any instant. And I could make an argument that any one of these images would be really great for a painting, but I kind of really did settle on him and then one other as well. So moving now into step 2. Now step 2 is where I actually do use references, and I try to be as faithful to them as I can be. I'm here to learn what I don't already know about this character. So this isn't the step to impose my vision and be original. That all comes later. Now it's all about study. I'm in a visual university at this stage. So in this example, I did 3 separate but more detailed paintings than step 1's sketches. And that's to teach myself some of the more intricate stuff about Mando, fill in those gaps that I wasn't sure of when I was sketching. I wanted to really understand the way the metal looks, for example, and how it reflects things. How reactive to color is it? That sort of thing. I also wanted to shore up my understanding of the details of the character. And when you paint something in more detail, it just helps remember those things. It embeds them into your visual library that you're building up. And I also learned there's a limit to how much I will remember about the finer details. Unless I work him over and over and over and really commit it to memory. Doing a painting of him now and then, it's not going to get me there. So you figure out pretty early that, pulling from some references or shoring up that knowledge base in step 3, where you're working from your imagination, is probably going to have to happen. but I've also taught myself what those areas are here in this step 2. And that gives me an advantage moving forward. One of the other things that I worked on a little bit as well was putting everything on a different layer. So with this particular one, this was the most rendered one until I got to the image of him carrying Grogu, which, as I jokingly say, is kind of like my final exam of this step in my visual university. But this one was pretty rendered, and I went pretty detailed on this one because it had a couple of things that I really wanted to understand. That mudhorn sigil on his shoulder, that chest design again is a little bit intricate and confusing, and then all those details on the wrist that I'm working on here. That all became something that I was really kind of interested in. Couldn't see the next wrist over very well, but I figured I can study it down the road as I go. I've done a couple of sketches of it at this point and thought, okay, I kind of get the base of it, but I'll need to do some research for that one as I move forward. But generally speaking, the main focus of this one was to also really understand the clothing that's under the armor. But now working on this one that became the sort of final project, I end up calling the painting The Reluctant Father. And I started from my remembered sketch that I started here. Now this one became a fully rendered painting, and I'm gonna focus on the whole execution of that on a separate video. But I really wanted to dial in on the character and prove that I got him. And so I just loved this pose so much that I stuck with it. But for this video, I ended up choosing this pose. Now this is gonna lead us into step 3 now, and this is the one that's creating from imagination. So the third step, this idea was sparked by the pictograph they showed of Tar Vizsla. Now he's the original Mandalorian who was also a Jedi Knight. He made the Darksaber that the Mandalorian won after he defeated Moff Gideon. So in the pictograph, we see Tar Vizsla holding the sword in a downward position, and it looks like he's the ruler of the Mandalorian people. Now I don't know if I'm right in my theory, but I think they're building the groundwork for Din Djarin, our Mandalorian, to become the new ruler who will unite those fractured Mandalorian people. But we're going to talk about that more in a second. First, I want to talk about the core concept of step 3. Now, this is the really fun one. This is also the scary as hell one. You're creating something entirely on your own from only your own vision. But that means you have no help. You've got no guides or safety nets. You're entirely on your own. It's fun, it's scary, it's both, but it's also yours, and it's a fantastic adventure. And remember, if that idea intimidates you or scares you or puts you off trying to do it, just remember, nobody's going to see the image unless you choose to show it to them. So just relax and let yourself go, just create. You can create a character that you love and enjoy drawing it, but you can do it in your own voice with your own story. So the main idea of this step is to do exactly that. You create your own image from the ground up, and you only use any research or knowledge or references if you absolutely need to in order to be correct about something you're slightly fuzzy on. So once I decided to put him in this throne room, for example, I grabbed a reference for that. I blocked it in from memory, and I was actually pretty bang on. I kind of surprised myself how well I remembered it. But, it's mostly a series of angles. It's like T's and inverted T's and V's. And so once I can't really get too proud, because once you reduce it to its base shapes, it's pretty straightforward. It's the detail in the throne design and the pots beside it and those things. It's always the details that are tricky. And so that's where the reference came in. I just wanted to shore up what I was remembering of that scene. So when you can reduce things to essential shapes, you can create vast areas on your own steam out of your imagination or memory. But, even then you can still take liberty when you're working from a research or reference, like the throne. If I did it to the proper scale from the little reference, he would have completely blocked it from view. And I didn't want to do that. From where he was standing, you just wouldn't have been able to see it. So I took license. So another thing I needed a little bit of help with was the wrist guards. As I mentioned in step 2, they're pretty finicky and they're hard to make perfect without a bit of research to support it unless you've totally memorized them. And with this being my own concept, I can't use a reference to directly solve that problem like I did the throne room, because there's just no other position exactly like this. But I can always find a similar angle on a wrist, and then I can just adapt that info to suit my needs. I can adjust it. So I'd learned enough about him in the first 2 steps that pulling off the overall pose was no trouble. It was just some of these smaller, finicky details that I needed help on. So that's what I did for his left wrist guard. I pulled from 3 or 4 different references just to understand what those little rocket formations would look like. But for the right wrist guard, I took advantage of some of the shortcuts that digital art offers me, offers all of us, I should say. And I actually copy and pasted from one of the other paintings I'd already done. So I did that actually for the Mudhorn sigil that he wears. That's how I created those designs on the flag as well. So it's a big time saver, and you can pull from something you've already painted rather than repainting the whole thing from scratch. And that really helps. I did have to adjust parts of the wrist. You'll see, I've changed those colors, but that was much easier than doing it right from scratch right at the beginning. Now, to give full disclosure, that's not a shortcut I'd always take advantage of if I have time on my hands, because I prefer painting things as organically as I can. That's just something I enjoy. But when you're on a deadline, man, it's good to know those shortcuts. And aside from all the things we've discussed about all these steps in creating a basic fan art image, the other thing I'm trying to teach myself is how to be a better and more efficient digital artist. It's a new medium for me, and so it falls to me to work in a variety of ways so that I can gain as broad an understanding of this medium as I can and sharpen my skills. And that is definitely an advantage digital has over traditional. I mean, it just saves you a ton of time. So if you're working with a client and you're on a deadline, those are good skills to work on. Now, the image itself, I would say the toughest part of the whole image, creating it imaginatively, was deciding how brightly the sword would shine off the armor. At first, I was going really light, like I was washing the armor really strong in that light, but I went away from that pretty quickly. The armor tends to read pretty dark, actually, when he's not in the sunshine. So I made it a bit darker overall, and then I just hit strong pops of light to show the power of the sword. And I think that contrast creates a lot more drama. So I hope that helps you on your creative journey. Now, let's get back to the fan theory. Let's finish that off. I like the idea of this eternal loner, who reluctantly became a dad and gathered friends along the way, but who seems to only see himself as an outcast in spite of all that. He's going through all these story arcs that bring him into relationships and accepting his true place, not only as a Mandalorian, of course, but somebody who's not meant to be alone, but also somebody who's destined to be the leader of his people. And I threw him kind of in the throne room of Bo-Katan because that's where she planned to lead from. It just kind of a little bit of a fun thing there. But also, I think the next little bit of my theory is that they're going to end up hooking up. I think maybe becoming co-rulers. Maybe also just because there's no other practical throne room after the destruction of their home world. But if you have any of your own theories or you think my theory might be right, let me know in the comments below. And one of the things I did want to talk about was the background. I struggled with the background, I'm going to be honest. I love his silhouette, the shape of his form so much that I kind of grudgingly painted the background, to be honest. And I actually ended up not finishing it. In this finished image, it's really not a totally rendered background. And that's just because I kind of lost steam on it. So I'm interested in your opinions. I prefer him with no background at all. So I think we'll look at a few progression shots of him with no background distracting it so you can see what I mean. I just think that, like this stage in particular, I love just how beautifully painterly he looks there. I do agree with my decision to bring him to a more rendered state, but I can't get away from the idea that I just love him on just that pure white. The black is a good choice too. I think that also shows his silhouette pretty well, adds a lot of drama to it, but for my taste, I really just enjoy him on the pure white. There's something very, very powerful about this for me, and as a standalone work of art, I actually prefer it. So I ended up in the video just stop working on the background. I just I brought it to a certain point and then thought, yeah, I don't think I'm going any further. So let me know what you all think about that. Hopefully you enjoy the video and you got something out of it. If you did, hit the like button for me. And if you have any questions about the digital process, let me know as well in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.